Welcome to Charting New Paths in Pre-K through 12 Education, a podcast by Solution Tree. In our authors segment, we invite our new and best-selling authors published by Solution Tree to share their expertise and valuable insights with you. Listen to this segment and add another tool in your toolbox of research-affirmed, classroom-ready strategies to improve student outcomes. I'm your host, Prisma Lopez Marin. Enjoy today's episode. Hello everyone. In today's episode, the book we'll be talking about is titled The Metacognitive Student: How to Teach Academic, Social, and Emotional Intelligence in Every Content Area. This book explains how teachers can learn and use a metacognitive approach with students. The authors call structured self-questioning, that's capital SEL. With that strategy, students and teachers learn how to stop and think about their thinking, metacognition, and weave critical thinking and problem-solving skills into everyday learning to increase self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, and responsible decision-making. We are joined by the co-author of this book, Rick Cohen. He is the Assistant Superintendent of Metuchen School District in New Jersey and serves as co-adjunct faculty at Rutgers University in New Brunswick, New Jersey. Before becoming assistant superintendent, Rick led as a principal for Red Bank Primary School in Red Bank, New Jersey, and acted as founding director of a new bilingual school, Colegio Americano, in San Salvador, El Salvador. He has served as a leader of social emotional learning, SEL, at the district, county, state, and national levels. Rick, thank you so much for joining me for this episode.
Thank you so much for having me, Prisma.
Can you go ahead and share with us what your current role in education is?
Sure. So I am the assistant superintendent for Metuchen School District in New Jersey, which involves overseeing curriculum instruction, assessment, PD. Our central office is also located in Moss School, which is a pre-KK half-day early childhood program. So I'm the principal of that, which is an absolute slice of heaven. I am co-adjunct faculty for Rutgers University in the School of Labor Management, where I help train school administrators to be able to collaborate and make shared decisions with teacher union leaders. I'm also co-founder and PD provider and consultant for selfq.org, and I'm also the proud co-author of The Metacognitive Student.
Tell us more about the work you did in 2015 with the New Jersey State Standards Revision Committee, where you helped add self-reflection and metacognition into academic state standards. Wow.
Sure, pleasure. So it actually sort of goes back to in 2012 when I did become the director of curriculum in Metuchen and the principal of Moss School, which was a half-day early childhood school. It was also at the same time in 2012 when the Common Core state standards had to be adopted and implemented K-12 in New Jersey. And so when I first started meeting with our half-day kindergarten teachers, they were really nervous they're like, how are we going to juggle all of this? There's a extreme rigor, they understood, to the academic expectations of the Common Core in language arts and math. They still had the other subjects to teach in science and social studies, and they really wanted to teach the kids social and emotional skills that they knew that they needed, and were worried about fitting that all into a half day. So at that point, I said, there's a way in which to teach academic skills and social and emotional skills, especially the academic skills within the Common Core, at that level of rigor at the same time. And began to explain to them the concept of having one problem-solving process built around the higher order thinking skills within the Common Core, which are also the same higher order thinking skills that are involved in social and emotional problem solving. And they began to get excited about it, and we wrote our curriculum in language arts and math in 2012 with this concept of a Common Core problem-solving process. One process that was common and core that kids could use for academic problem solving like math or figuring out an unknown word while reading, but then also could use to solve social conflicts on the playground or in the hallway. Teachers were super excited about it. They said they were doing their best work. In 2014, they got published in the NJEA Review Great Ideas column. But then in 2015, our governor at the time in New Jersey, Governor Chris Christie, was considering running for president in 2016. So in somewhat of a political maneuver, began to say that he was going to get rid of the Common Core state standards in New Jersey, and that he was going to create a committee that was going to be in charge of revising the standards in order to eliminate the Common Core. We were all nervous about that because we were excited about our alignment to Common Core and how well it was working for kids. So I decided to get on the committee to see if I could help maintain some of the pieces that we were really invested in. I got onto the K2 Standards Subcommittee. And I remember distinctly on that first day of the subcommittee meeting, I began talking with some other kindergarten, first and second grade teachers about, hey, how could we think about implementing and injecting and embedding self-reflection and metacognition into academic standards as early as kindergarten? And they all looked at me like I was a little crazy. And at that moment, fate would have it that the chief academic officer for the state, who was overseeing the process, and at the time, the early childhood director for the NJDOE, I don't know if they overheard, but they pulled me aside and asked me to serve as the lead of the K2 committee and on the steering committee for the revision commission. And so I kind of took that as perhaps a mandate to push self-reflection and metacognition. As we began to talk about self-reflection and metacognition into the upper grades, and with the steering committee, which was made up of also university professors, the university professors were extremely excited about self-reflection and metacognition. I remember one distinctly saying, does this mean that when kids do writing and they hand it in, it won't be the first time they wrote something? Would this mean that they will go back and reread their thinking and their writing and revise it and correct it? And we said, absolutely. They were in full support. So we built in those standards into writing. And then in 2017, got back with our staff in Metuchen, and we've been building in self-reflection and metacognition into writing, as well as into all the other subject areas ever since.
That's so much. Did you ever think that, I mean, this is your passion, this is what you do, so it doesn't seem like it's something of a political, agenda of yours, but did you ever envision yourself having to be part of something like that to actually just continue something that you're so that you think is so important for your area to cover?
I mean, I never imagined myself being able to sit in the seat at a state board of education meeting to propose metacognition be adopted by the state. I felt very blessed to have the opportunity just to get on the committee. I was very fortunate to be given sort of the role on the revision commission. And, I think in part it was a time when I think a lot of people were very skeptical about what the committee was going to be doing. And I remember people saying distinctly, I want to stay as far away from that as possible. And I've always learned over time, when you look at problem solving, when there's a problem, it's often an opportunity. And so with that philosophy, I had best hopes that this would be a good opportunity, and it turned out that it was.
It turned out great. You have created such a huge influence in all of this. Obviously on purpose, but not majorly. That was like your goal. Like, let me sit on these committees and let me make all this change in a government level. But it resulted in such positive ways as how it's now implemented. So that's exciting. As a current education leader, what are you seeing in the field that has a severe need for conscience work with SEL, especially from the strains with the COVID-19 pandemic that has occurred?
Yeah, so I mean, in short, the need for conscious work and developing SEL skills in all students right now is extremely severe. But to kind of paint a picture on that, almost kind of going back a little bit to compare then and now, I started teaching in 1995 as a volunteer in juvenile detention centers. And I quickly saw there the need to teach, young kids how to make responsible decisions so they didn't end up in the prison system. So I signed up for Teach for America, which was a program that placed recent college graduates without a teaching certificate in areas of teacher shortage. I was sent to Phoenix, Arizona, where I worked with what was at that time very often called at-risk youth. I was teaching seventh grade, and in getting to know my seventh graders, the need for SEL then was daunting. A lot of kids were dealing with drugs, gangs, and violence. They were dealing with a lot of fear and anger, and they really needed to learn how to make responsible decision making and self-awareness and self-management skills to deal with their emotions, to even be in a place to make responsible decisions and think the problems through. So now fast forward to the present day, even before the pandemic, mental health was it was getting to the levels of an epidemic. Affluent, high achieving school districts saw incredible rates of students dealing with academic stress, leading them to levels of anxiety and depression that was really alarming. And then COVID hit. And with COVID, kids not having the social interaction and hard to develop social awareness over Zoom, hard to build relationships from your room. Emotional connections were lost. And of course, depression and mental health and well-being became even greater a concern. And now we're in that sort of post-COVID timeframe where students haven't developed those skills. They haven't developed the social awareness, the emotional regulation. And on top of that, when you think about students with a smartphone, I've heard experts say that any child with a smartphone and on social media is at risk. We look at the suicide rates for girls between the ages of 10 to 14, the highest rising rates of suicide than any other group in the world. Wow. So, it all compounds to the need for SEL is greater now than ever.
Wow. I appreciate that you shared where you did start seeing that when you were working with at-risk youth, because it just shows that all of this all of the things that is in this book and everything that has to do with SEL could have been done so early on. Obviously we don't want to go back and forth, but you always see the good success that SEL has had. And for some people that I know in real life that who were at-risk youth or other things, factored in their life that know about this sort of work, they mentioned this would have been so helpful if a lot of this was put more attention to our schools in that way. So it's really interesting how that also varies within each state. But it's all very interesting. I really, I'm very, I have like a really good attention or interest in SEL and in how it all interacts with each other, specifically at such a young age, to where it can really do some absolute influence, and it's really powerful. And then as it continues on to the rest of your school, especially more on a personal note, as an immigrant to the country, being able to kind of understand, just the culture shock, but then also going into how we're bringing our own background of how things were done in our country's education, and then being able to being taught in the NSCL type of framework is so helpful, I feel like, for someone who is not from the actual country and knows all the other things that encompass, being part of the United States. So it's all very interesting. So now let's get into your book, The Metacognitive Student, that you co-authored with Deanne Opatowski, James Savage, Susan Olsen Stevens, and Edward Dara. Describe what structured self-questioning means, and how did you and your colleagues come together to create this book centered on metacognition?
So, structural self questioning is a metacognitive strategy that helps students take a step back and have a think about their thinking and their feelings. Often I've felt as a teacher, I'd be like, would you just use your brain? Sometimes with kids, but this really teaches them how to use their brain. Sometimes we like to say it's a strategy to teach students how to be the CEOs of their own brains. And another way to define it, it's a strategy that's built upon one structure or common set of steps that can be used to solve any problem in any content or context, but then includes these prompts or these cues each step of the way, which are the self questions, at capital SEL, self questions, which serve as that. So the structure and the self questions as prompts serve as that guide to help students, think through multi-step problem solving, work through complex challenges, complex emotions, because it often involves, multiple cognitive processes. And this helps them sift through step by step, logically, one at a time. And so they don't get lost kind of in their thinking, especially when emotions run high.
And so how did you and your colleagues, bring all of this together and then create such a book like this?
So I'm happy to talk about how the co-authors as colleagues came together, but it really all starts with a colleague that I haven't mentioned specifically yet, who wrote the foreword for the book, and Dr. Maurice Elias is a professor of psychology from Rutgers University. And this work is really, it's all a derivative of his evidence-based research and pedagogy and curriculum on how to teach social and emotional learning, and particularly responsible decision making, self-awareness, self-management, and social awareness. His work, in a nutshell, his evidence-based pedagogy was that teachers needed to teach students an overall strategy to guide their self-talk. And of course, that's coming from the field of psychology. Another word for that could be metacognition. And just using those terms back in the day, let's say 10 years ago, even with teachers about self-talk and metacognition was frustrating for them. They didn't have a background or understanding of it. They were maybe even fearful of those words. And so I really needed help in translation with that, but more than anything, I needed help. Dr. Elias was there for us every step of the way, but we needed help taking what was the best practice from the field of psychology and translating that into the field of education. So it really started in 2012. I sat down with Dr. Maurice Elias, Deanne Opatowski, who was our literacy consultant at the time in Metuchen, and Dr. Grant Wiggins, the late president of Authentic Education. And we had a bit of a brainstorming session on how to take this pedagogy and this evidence-based practice from the field of psychology and sort of smush it, embed it, and integrate it into practical strategies for teachers with what they already had to teach. The teachers already had a lot on their plate. And so, we took a lot of guidance from Dr. Maurice Elias and Dr. Grant Wiggins, Deanne Opatowski, myself, Dr. Grant Wiggins began doing something he called threading, which was how we were trying to smush this guiding self-talk into a problem-solving practical strategy that fit into math problem solving, into the scientific method, social studies, and conflict resolution. And at that time, we started talking about that not just having a problem-solving structure would be helpful, but having those prompts to help kids each step of the way. So I did some Googling of what a structure with some self-prompts would look like, and came across Susan Olsen-Stevens' work. Reached out to her and said, would you like to join us? We were admirers of her work. And I remember having that first phone call with her and Dr. Wiggins, who she was a big fan of. And Dr. Grant Wiggins told Susan over the phone that he had read her book and her work resonated with him. And I remember her gasping. And just the excitement of this group in terms of trying to put together something that we all believe could be really powerful work, but just had to figure out how to make it digestible for teachers. And then we were all set to do a combined PD at Metuchen, the four of us, and that was going to be on June 2nd in 2015. Right before that was Memorial Day weekend. I got an email from Dr. Grant Wiggins that he was happily flipping burgers, but to reach out to him on Tuesday when I got in the office so we could talk planning. When I called on Tuesday, Dr. Grant Wiggins had passed away the night before. And so a lot of this work that we do with Deanne and Susan is sort of to carry on the legacy of Dr. Grant Wiggins. Dr. Elias has been with us every step of the way. And then James Savage is a former Teach for America alumni who I taught in Phoenix with, became very close with as a friend. He also was teaching high school English and began to use this structure and these self-questions and experimented with them and piloted them with his students, and then continued to do so when he became a professor of English in George Mason. So he was using it at the college level. And then sort of lastly, there was a lead teacher in Moss School, Robin Dara, who was a big proponent and a great help in terms of moving our structured self-questioning with kindergarten. And she said, my son, Eddie Dara, is a school counselor and would be a great help in terms of how to use this for emotional problem solving. So Eddie Dara was a school counselor at the time, and we really leaned on him to flesh out how do we do emotional problem solving and how could structured self-questioning help, whether it's just implementing that into the classroom and daily routines, or for school counselors who may get students who are dealing with some of the more stronger emotions, and would this be a helpful resource in the guidance department? And so we all worked together over a period of a number of years, and everyone sort of had their area and niche of expertise, but at the same time, really a cohesive group putting their heads together to come to one simple, practical approach that could be used across the board.
Wow. See, I like stories like that where the origin brings everybody from different areas, but then it also for one specific purpose to make this happen. So that's really good. I like that story. Not obviously it's real life, but there's a story within there. So in this book, there is a strong focus on a partnership between both the teacher and the students working together towards a holistic approach. Why is it crucial to initiate this approach, and how early can it be implemented?
So, great question. Starting with, why is it crucial to initiate this approach? I'll go back to when it initiated. It actually really initiated for me when I was a Teach for America teacher in Phoenix, Arizona, and I was working with seventh graders and having challenges with behavior management right off the bat as a new teacher, and wanted to build relationships with my students in order to gain their trust and try to help them work towards a partnership in my classroom so that they could stay focused and learn, the environment would be conducive. And I felt like the level of respect from teacher to student and student to teacher could be developed. Not really knowing how to do that, began to just sit and talk with kids. I would give lunch detentions and sitting with them, having lunch, asking them what's the problem? Mm-hmm. And in a lot of cases, the kids told me, I'm overwhelmed. I have a lot in my life that's going on. I'm dealing with gangs and gang violence. There's drugs. Sometimes it's hard for me to focus in class, or I have a lot of anger and I have a lot of fear. And I didn't know at that time exactly how to help them. I thought, I don't know a lot about gangs or how to deal with drugs as a seventh grader, or confronting a lot of violence and that kind of fear and anger. So I just kind of kept asking them questions. I asked them, what do you know about drugs, gangs, and violence? What could you possibly do to deal with these stressors in your life? And, is this working for you? And how's it going? And how can I help? And just over time, asking those same questions over and over again, I know it gave my students that belief that I was there to listen to them. I think it also told them that they had a lot of knowledge and expertise and the ability to think and come up with solutions to their own problems. That it wasn't the teacher that had all the answers, but they had the answers too. And what they really needed was a guide on the side a lot of times. And so this became really an approach. The structured self-questioning became an approach that gave teachers a tool to be that guide on the side. Nowadays, I think a lot of teachers are nervous about asking kids how they feel. I think they're nervous to hear the kids tell them things that they don't know how to handle. And they know they're not counselors. They don't have their psychology degrees. But what the pedagogy from Dr. Elias says is really the teacher should ask questions first, open-ended questions first. And so this gives that teacher those questions that they can pose to students. And then, of course, if students ever say anything to those questions, like how do I feel or what are the problems I'm dealing with that go beyond a teacher, then we always tell teachers, then that's the time when you would, alert the school counselor or the school psychologist, or if there's an in-school therapist or whatever resources may be there to deal with more of the high level anxiety or severe, safety concerns. But for the most part, this is that it builds that partnership where teachers can feel safe, know kind of what questions to ask, and then be able to just listen. How early can this be initiated? So the research from Dr. Maurice Elias, along with the research from Dr. Myrna Shore, also a psychology professor from Drexel University, says that this process can be initiated as early as 4 years old. And we have found that, so the research would say the best thing a teacher can do is ask these open-ended questions to students first. Ask them in sequence of a problem-solving process that they teach in the classroom. And then, of course, at the younger ages, if the students are struggling, then teachers can at that point make suggestions of options. For example, if you ask a student how they're feeling and they say they're feeling frustrated, a teacher may ask, well, what can you do? And sometimes students won't know what to do, or what they say to do may not work in the classroom, right? They may say, I'm going to take a long nap, right? So the teachers say, well, maybe what we can do is take a break. Maybe we can take a walk. Maybe we can do some breathing. And then, of course, if students struggle from there, then the teachers may, provide the right answer at that time, at that age. But what happens is when we start early like that, kids they begin to internalize the questions that the teacher is going to ask. They begin to trust that teacher. They begin to feel comfortable taking risks and saying what they might be able to do to solve a problem. And the more and more of these interactions occur, the kids begin to internalize what questions the teachers are going to ask them. We have students as young as 4 years old who now begin to do this dialogue. They've had it so many times with the teacher that when they get upset, they're saying out loud the questions to themselves. And sometimes even in third person. We have a student, and I'm going to use a fake name to protect the identity of a student, but we have a student, let's call him Sammy, who'll be like, Sammy's upset. How is Sammy feeling? Sammy is frustrated. What can Sammy do? Sammy can take a break, or Sammy can do deep breathing. And so we see that they now really are guiding their self-talk as early as 4 years old. And the nice thing is that when this curriculum is something that's implemented at that early age, they become much more self-regulated, much more focused. They begin to develop those executive function skills, which really help them be successful in school. So it's a great almost prevention program. And then as we do it more and more over time, they begin to be able to feel more confident in tackling some of those more complex problems that either happen academically in the classroom or as, socially and emotionally as they turn into adolescence and get into high school and beyond.
That's so powerful right there. The 4-year-old who is debriefing themselves at that moment, because like you said, that does provide that's such a good foundation for later on. Because if you're dealing with so much as you know, a preteen, a teen, and then you still have that in your cognition, or in your mind, that's how you debrief yourself with. Hopefully they do continue that debriefing their self, but it stays with you. If you have it at 4, it's going to stay with you for the rest of your life. So that's really interesting. Wow. I know there's science in this and there's psychology in this, but it's very interesting. So, in addition to that, I wanted to ask something for what you said, answering this question. So, having or creating that rapport, it's so important. And how does that work when teachers leave, or the shortage of teachers is taking place in the time?
So the one of the things I really like about taking this approach, this metacognitive strategy of structured self-questioning, is that it's very easy to learn, it's very easy to implement, and it fits into any curriculum, works at any age level. So as new teachers come in, and it's part of our new teacher training, it's easy to get them on board with this right off the bat. And so therefore there's that continuum and there's that consistency, right? Because you do want the teacher to be that partner. And so if you explain to a new teacher coming in, or even someone who doesn't have an education background, no training, you can still empower them to establish those relationships with their students right away and give them confidence in that. They can build a classroom management system right away, which often is a struggle for newer teachers or bringing people in from outside the field. It's like a restorative practice already set up. And it creates that environment and that trust, which is often a real struggle for new teachers in times of teacher shortages, while still maintaining the consistency and the cohesion across grade levels. Now they know what kids are bringing in with them, and can tap into that prior knowledge. And to get them prepared to be able to do all that, it could be done in a day.
Wow. Go ahead. So most recently, this book has received recognition with 2 national awards for Best Indie Book in Education, Forwards Reviews 2021, and then the IPPY Awards 2022. Tell us what these awards represent as an educator and education leadership, but then also the importance for such exposure that it can have on SEL strategies from this book.
So in terms of what this represents for me as an educator, on one end, the awards are really validating all the time, all the mornings that I woke up really early, the hours spent, in our mudroom, typing away, plenty of time when, I have children and, want to spend some time with them, but having that discipline to go off and, dedicate this time to it. I'm happy. I was proud to tell my kids that it's not just me doing something off on the side. That people are going to actually read this and find it to be helpful was really, really rewarding and validating. I was really excited about it for the co-authors who I did reel into the work of writing a book, which is arduous. And they spent a lot of time on it. So I was glad that we all felt like this made this feel extra worthwhile. The importance that I think it has is, there's a lot of great ways and there's a lot of great work out there on how to teach kids SEL. This is, I believe, one of them, one of many. But the challenge, I think, today for many educators is that it's just a flood of SEL curriculum, SEL resources, SEL strategies, and many of them are evidence-based and some of them maybe not so much. So I do think that having these awards helps distinguish that this is one that is credible, We always talk about how it is evidence-based. And so I think these awards help to kind of, guide maybe teachers who are looking at a sea of options, that this is one that is worth taking a look at.
Right. What are the things that you've received as far as questions, frequently asked questions from fellow educators that kind of want to hear your guidance on how to implement the book strategies?
Sure, yeah, that's a great question. What are some of the questions? Where are teachers' minds, and how are they wrapping their brains around this? So, when we go off to do trainings, especially in the newer districts that we work with, some of the questions we get are, it's really a sign of the time of where kids are at, and how can this strategy be used not only just to teach those cell competencies that we target, but helping kids that are having different emotional challenges. And one that keeps coming up is about motivation, especially at the secondary level. So they ask, how can I deal with students who aren't motivated to even start the problem-solving process? And they always answer with, I don't care. And so that's a great way. And we talk about how this strategy gives kids a voice and choice in what they're learning, whether you're using this as an inquiry-based research process and maybe letting kids select the focus, or if not, letting them do a lot of the brainstorming of solutions. Another question we get is, how would we field questions from parents who feel like the teacher should give kids the answers, or fix kids instead of kicking back questions to the kids? They ask about how often is this strategy sort of used in the classroom? What's the frequency? How often is it teacher to student conversations? How often are students using the steps and the questions independently? And how often may they use it with a partner or in groups? And then questions like, how long does it take to see improvement in students' problem-solving skills? And how effective is it if it's not adopted district-wide? And so I think these questions are great, which show the teachers are really wrapping their brains around it. They're doing a lot of critical thinking about how they can do it effectively. And because, teachers don't have a lot of time, don't have a lot of real estate, and they want to make sure that they're investing their time and their energy wisely. And so I think these questions show that they're really thinking about it. It also gives us the opportunity to say that it's a very versatile strategy and can be used to help in a lot of ways.
Right. So then the book also encourages educators to take charge and use the strategy. What are some benefits of structured self-questioning? I like how it's SELF, self-questioning, to place within every content area. Mainly, how does it actually influence, or how does it actually provide a solid benefit for each content area?
So the key in learning is for kids to be doing the thinking and the doing. And so this is a great tool to help teachers make that gradual release of responsibility. So, at first, this is a tool where teachers can use to model how they think in a structured way using the steps and the self-questions. And then the more and more the kids hear the teacher doing it, the more and more then the teacher can now start releasing the steps and the questions directly to the students and ask them to do the thinking and ask them to do the problem solving. And the idea is that the more practice the students get in using these steps and these questions to solve, maybe low-level math problems, or to design a scientific lab experiment, to conduct inquiry-based research, to analyze a social conflict back in the past and the decision-making that went behind it and the different perspectives that were there. These questions prompt kids to do all that thinking from the start to the end. And it allows the teacher to be that guide on the side there. And if a student gets stuck on a particular question, then the teacher's empowered to say, okay, do we need to go back and ask ourselves either those questions again? Do we need to pick a different focus? Or the teacher can jump in and provide targeted support where the student needs it in that spot. And the idea is that you're building the students as autonomous, self-directed, self-motivated, researchers and problem solvers, engineers, design thinkers. You're really bringing out the student voice and choice in their learning. We were recently published in Educational Leadership in their November edition on self-directed learning, and how this is a tool to help kids really be able to direct their own learning within, parameters that the teacher is able to set in terms of content. But again, this puts the onus on the student to be able to do the thinking and the problem solving, as opposed to what happens too often today, where students, when they get stuck, they're going to look to the adult. They're going to ask the teacher, what do I do here? Right? I'm stuck. I don't know what to do. And they stop. So the idea here is that, okay, if you get stuck, that's okay. Let's use some of these questions to help us get unstuck. And so we start to see students become more perseverant, grittier, right? More resilient. They become more confident. And then, of course, when we transfer that to dealing with their emotions, we see them become much more self-regulated in terms of being able to cope with the frustration that may happen when we have tough academic assignments or problems and we don't know what to do, or when we have math anxiety. Can we work through that using a strategy that we're very familiar with to help us get over any fears or concerns, and then be able to then focus our brains and our minds in working with a challenging situation, sticking with it. And then finally, also knowing when it's time to say, you know what, this is too hard for me, and now is the right time to ask for help.
So it's providing, giving them that ownership, giving the students the ability to have that ownership of basically their education, but also the way that they interact with the teacher, but then also their reactions, having that ownership of their actual whole self. That's really, really, that's amazing. I would have definitely appreciated that with math and finite. That would have been so helpful. I loved math, absolutely loved math. I still do, but just doesn't register. Even after being taught, I would have to reteach it to myself. But this is very valuable. So in chapters 7 and 8, since you mentioned emotion, the book addresses the intrapersonal, helping educators teach students how to recognize their own emotions. How does this work help create a blueprint that guides students to regulate problem solving?
So, we have found that teaching this strategy for emotional problem solving is often the best way to start introducing this strategy for two main reasons. Number one, emotions are key to learning. Mm-hmm. We know from the field of psychology and education that students need to be in an optimal zone for learning. If they're too stressed, learning is impeded. If they have no concern whatsoever, learning is impeded. You want to get them in that sweet spot where there's just the right level of concern and emotional attachment and connection, but not too much. And so using this as a strategy to help when kids are maybe too stressed or completely unmotivated, and for them to be able to keep themselves in that zone for as long a period of time as possible is really, really valuable for their learning. The other reason why it's really valuable to have teachers start with this is, teachers can be perfectionists and they like to have control. But at the end of the day, we can't control what goes on in a student's mind. And so no easier way for a teacher to learn that when it comes to a child's emotions, especially the younger, the stronger the emotion. A teacher could have all the best intent to help that child, but that child maybe just need to be getting it out. The idea, especially now, I think a lot of our teachers of the younger students are seeing kids have these really strong emotional outbursts, and they can last for a long period of time, and teachers can feel powerless and frustrated by that. Right. And so what this does is show teachers how they can be a source of support and a teacher for children when emotions are really strong, and that involves having the student learn the strategy and apply it for themselves,
Mm-hmm.
and be how to be that guide on the side. In the realm of emotions, I think really then gives the teacher a sense of how valuable the strategy can be, because it can be learned quickly, and you can see students, you can hear what they're thinking, and you can see themselves using the steps and the questions. We have T-shirts that we make for the kids that have the step names and visuals on the shirt, and we'll give them STEM challenges, and we'll ask them to design a structure that puts shade on plants. And when we ask the kids, well, how did you design this? We'll see them close their eyes, and if they're wearing the shirt, they'll kind of point to, well, first I had to stop and think and come up with these different ideas, and one idea I didn't like, so I had to go back and think again. And we see physically how they're using the steps and the questions to help them think through things. And I think that is most apparent and really, really the most beneficial at first when we see them dealing with their own emotions.
So lastly, as an education leader, what advice do you have for other administrators and teachers to introduce this book as a tool to support their schools and districts?
Great. So I love this question. If I could talk to administrators and teachers about, the value of this and what they might say to their colleagues back at their schools, I would ask them to introduce it for what it is. It's a strategy. It's just one little easy to learn and use strategy that you just want to provide eyedropper dosages or doses into your already existing daily routine. You want to sprinkle the self-questions into your already existing curriculum and instruction. I would hope they would introduce it for what it's not. It's not a curriculum. It's not a new program. It's not a new textbook. Again, it's a strategy that helps them to do their best teaching with what they're already teaching and with already existing classroom management. It's a tool that can be given to kids so the onus of the thinking and the problem solving can be given to kids, but with the support. Not asking them to do it all on their own independently, but it's an intervention when needed, a tool that teachers can use to help them guide those conversations and those partnerships with students, to be that guide on the side and not give those answers. I would like them to be able to share that it has great results. The data shows dramatic increases in student academic achievement. Our middle school went from a focus school, which is a school that had wide gaps in achievement, to a National Blue Ribbon that we received this year, largely based upon the dramatic increases in our test scores in language arts, where we implemented this as a research simulation task approach, and dramatically increased the reading of informational text. We've seen dramatic increases in our math. When I first arrived in Metuchen School District in 2012, the area that our students struggled the most was multi-step problem solving. Now that's an area where our students shine and glow on our tests is multi-step problem solving. It's widely recognized, it's received numerous awards. It's been published in Edutopia multiple times, in educational leadership and district administration. I'd also want them to tell everybody that it only takes a day or two of learning. All the resources are free and easily customized to match teachers' style and preferences. There can be ongoing support as needed. We have some resources at Solution Tree that are free, reproducibles that can be downloaded. Of course, the book is a wonderful resource. It really does explain everything. And I think if anyone were to read that book, they would feel that they could take this strategy right into their classroom and begin, doing some of the best teaching of their lives without having to get a PhD in psychology.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. This was great. I obviously always learn when I talk to our authors, but this just has been so informative. So thank you so much for your time and just such a great conversation about all of this and being able to explain to us that, through self-questioning, teachers have access to a ready-made strategy, as you mentioned, that builds SEL into academic instruction. So thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much for having me. This is wonderful. I really appreciate it.
This book is definitely another tool for your toolbox with teaching. Make an impact in your classroom by using this results-focused resource where the authors dive deep into the what and the how of structured self-questioning. Begin using this powerful academic and social-emotional approach in your own classroom to develop students into thriving thinkers who are confident, healthy, and adaptive, as well as resilient. This book is available on the Solution Tree website, solutiontree.com. Look for the Metacognitive Student, How to Teach Academic, Social, and Emotional Intelligence in Every Content Area by Richard Cohen, Deanne Obatowski, James Savage, Susan Olson Stevens, and Edward Dara. Now for a sponsor message here. At the company at Solution Tree, we share your vision to transform education to ensure learning for all, and we can help you make this vision a reality. No other professional learning company provides our unique blend of research-based, results-driven services that improve learning outcomes for students. We appreciate you tuning in. Make sure to navigate to our solutiontree.com/podcast page to listen to our other episodes. Also, remember to like our episodes and subscribe to our YouTube channel. This has been your host, Prisma Lopez Marin. Thank you for joining me for Charting New Paths in Pre-K through 12 Education.